Hello, everyone. Welcome. How are you doing? How are you enjoying the conference? Isn't it amazing? And hello to our virtual attendees. We have a hybrid event. And for everyone virtual, we're going to do a Q&A session at 3:10. So join and we'll get to talk about your questions. So I am Dima. I'm a leadership speaker and executive coach, and my focus is the advancement of women in leadership. This is something I'm just so passionate about. And today we're going to talk about how we can build trust, and how can we use it in order to continue to advance in our career. So I want you to think about a person you work with now or in the past that you trust the most. What certain qualities about the person you like that make you trust her or him or them? Consistency, yeah, so they're consistent in their behavior, no surprises, right? Very good. What else? Ethic? Yeah, that person is ethical, and that is so important. Good listener. Yes, that's a big one too, like person who's being present with you and listens to you, and that is so great. So when I think about building trust, and the first time where I had such an eye-opening experience that was so shocking for me, it was, I used to work for IBM, and they moved me on an international assignment to Japan. And I got there, I was the only woman assignee. I was intimidated, but of course very excited by the opportunity. Never spoke Japanese before, a brand new team. And I wanted to go there and I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to show the company that their investment is worth it. So I became so direct, right to the point, focusing on the bottom line, focusing on the metrics, focusing on due dates and all of this, and I was sharing them with my team and being so strict about them. Initially, my Japanese team, they were nice, but then they stopped responding to my emails and they stopped attending my meetings. And I was so surprised what was going on. But then I realized that there's just something weird happening. And I asked the interpreter and I said, what is going on? And she said, Dima, you're missing an important step. Whenever you're working with a culture like the Japanese culture, you need to start by building trust. And in your situation, you jumped into the goals and the metrics and the bottom line, and you forgot that step, and as a result, it's difficult for the team to trust you, and they're not gonna be able to listen to you. So I was so surprised because my behavior, the way I was acting, which is goal-focused and all of this, that's what helped me in the US to get promoted and to get recognition. But when I was in a whole different culture, I needed to adapt, and I did not even realize that I needed to do that. So I started to slow down and spend time with the team, go out with them drinking a lot of sake. Apparently that helps to build trust. Eating sushi, getting to learn about them and their families, learning about their stories, their experiences, slowing down and not being all about the goal and the results. Because in my situation, I was afraid we're not going to meet the goals, not because the goal themselves. I was afraid how that's going to reflect on me and my performance. So the more I slowed down and the more I connected with the team, and I started asking them how they would like me to be a leader, what do I need to adapt and change in order for me to build better trust and better relationship with them, somehow they started responding to my emails. They started attending my meetings again. But the best part, they started performing as much as I wanted, and we ended up meeting our goals. What I realized many times, whether it is the culture we're working with, but trust, just like I learned in Japan, is the foundation for everything. We're not going to be able to build strong relationships. We're not going to be able to lead effectively, to perform well, unless if we have this foundation. And every research that's out there that talks about what are the most critical skills and qualities of employees that organizations want, every single research shows that number one is trust. In my situation, when I was asked to give this talk, and I was told to talk about trust, I'm like, are you kidding me? Just do it. It's easy, just build trust. And then I started digging deep and realizing it's not a matter of just doing it. We need to talk about it. We need to have better understanding of what is the foundation of trust, what makes us trustworthy, and how can we use even the psychology of trust that we're going to talk about today to help us build better relationships and engage better with others. So who's ready to start? Good. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. I want you to think about when was the first time in your life as you were growing up that you realized that trust is important, or you also saw a trust being broken. Can you remember something like that? No? It's a difficult question, I know. In my situation, I remember I was growing up in the Middle East, and that's where the accent is from, in Jordan. And I used to spend a lot of time with my grandmother. One day, I was hearing her talk with my grandfather, and they were saying that they needed a gardener to come and help with some things in the garden that my grandfather couldn't do. And they had a certain budget. They were both retired, didn't have a lot of money. So they had this budget that they need, all they could afford to pay for the gardener. And they found somebody to come and help them. I watched my grandfather talking with him. And as they were trying to negotiate the price, this gardener wanted what's equivalent to $100. And at that time, it's a lot of money, like long time ago. And my grandfather could not afford it, and he did not have the budget for it. So what the gardener said, he said, don't worry about money right now. Let's build trust. Let's eat bread and salt together. So it's like, in a way, a little ceremony by sitting, having their moment, eating bread and salt together, that was supposed to help them build some kind of invisible relationship and trust in order for them to decide if they're going to work together. And I was so excited, again, as 5-year-old, I was sitting with them, eating bread and salt and enjoying that moment. And then towards the end, my grandfather told the gardener, he said, I'll find a way to pay you $100. I'll figure out a way. And he went and he got the $100 and he gave them to the gardener. And that was a big eye-opener for me as a little girl early on to see how trust can be established. It is by spending the time with each other. It is by being intentional and by also having these little, I don't know, they're called ceremonies or little things that people do from all around the world, in this situation, breaking bread and eating together. So that is the first memory I have related to this topic. Now, we need to remember how important trust is. People buy from people they trust. People hire people they trust. They promote people they trust. They mentor people they trust. And they partner with people they trust. So it's not a matter of just saying, well, just do it. No, it is so important, and we need to spend time thinking about it and being so intentional about it. And also to realize that we're working with people that are different. The way I build trust may be different than the way you build trust. The way my culture builds trust may be different than your culture, the way it builds trust. So how can we be so much more intelligent emotionally in order to understand where other people come from, and how can we adapt our style in order to meet their needs and make them feel comfortable and come across as trustworthy. So it is a decision in everything we do, every single thing, every word we say, every action we do, we have a choice of either increasing trust or decreasing trust. The problem is, trust is so fragile. If we break trust, it's going to be so difficult to rebuild it back. Think about somebody that broke your trust. Are you ever going to be able to really trust them blindly 100%? Maybe not. I know in my situation, it's difficult. So that's why it's so important for us to continue to preserve and protect the trust. And this is a big part of our brand when we think about what do we represent and how do we want other people to perceive us. I'm sure all of us would want other people to see us as trustworthy. So the question is like, how do we do it? So let's spend time talking about building trust. I'm going to share with you 5 main areas that are important as we build trust. And these are not just the 5, there's so many more, but with the time that we have today, we're going to talk about 5. The first one is transparency. Can this person be honest about themselves with others? So is that person transparent, or is that person holding, an invisible, fake thing that they're covering their true intentions with, a mask? Care. Does this person really have good intentions? Does this person really care about me? Integrity. Does this person have a strong sense of ethics? Let's see if the next one is going to come. Competence. Can this person do what they need to do? Because you can be the most ethical person, an honest person, but if you don't know what you're supposed to do and you don't have the skills, it's going to be difficult for other people to trust you. And then consistency, and this goes back to your point. Consistency is not just a one-time thing, and we need to be consistent in our behavior all the time, in every single interaction, and be intentional about it. So we're going to go through each one of those. The first one is transparency. So I love this picture because she's smiling and she's happy, but she has this long Pinocchio nose. How many of you know someone like that? Yeah, somebody came to your mind. I have multiple people that came to my mind when I saw this picture, where some people, they act like everything is fine and they're happy and they seem that they act like they care, but they have a whole different agenda in the background. And it's so tricky to work with these people because whether we realize it or not, it's always going to come back and hurt us. So how can you work with someone who's not transparent? So that's why it's so important for us to learn to be transparent. One of the experiences I had was with one of my employees, and her name is Laura, and Laura was always acting like she was so caring, and she is definitely a subject matter expert in her field, so that made me trust her until I was working with her and I realized, well, Laura was not telling me the truth in many things, not meeting deadlines, but blaming others, always gossiping. So it became so difficult for me to even work with her and to trust her because I knew there was just something bigger issue in the background beyond just getting the work done. Now, the other one is caring. And when we're talking about these 5 different areas, it's not just a matter of individuals. It is also organizations we work for, companies that we buy from. Do they care about us? And if they don't care about us, we're not going to be able to trust them. And here's an example that happened to me during the pandemic. So if you remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, many people, they were afraid of flying, but also at that time, we didn't know how COVID was transmitted. I remember I was washing everything I was buying. Like, how many of you were doing that? Like wiping, can you imagine how much work we had to do? Because we didn't know how it was transmitted. We were told all kinds of confusing things. So I had a family emergency at the beginning of COVID, and I needed to fly to Chicago. I was so horrified to be on an airplane for multiple hours, not knowing about how to protect myself. But one of the things that always came to my mind every time I travel is what the airlines say, that safety is their ultimate goal, right? So safety of their passenger is their ultimate goal. And that made me feel a little good that most likely the airline is going to care about my safety, which is to protect me from COVID. I got on a flight and I found this, where it was packed, including the middle seat. Every single seat was salt, and I was just sitting there feeling like a sardine, and I'm like, I'm most likely going to get COVID from this. I was so mad that I committed to myself never, ever to fly that airline again. Because at that time, they told me, even though their words say that they care and they want to make sure that everybody is safe, their action demonstrated something different. And their action showed me that their value is different than what I value. I value safety. I value to ensure that the companies I work pay money to, they care about me as a passenger and as a consumer. What they told me is that what they value is the bottom line. And the bottom line is so much more important than my safety. So again, trust is not just with individuals, it's with everybody we're working with. And it's not a matter of the words. We can say that we're trustworthy all day long, but how can we ensure that we're really acting in a trustworthy way to show our team members, to show our customers, business partners, suppliers, family members, friends, that we truly care. Next one is integrity. So if you remember with my grandfather's story with the gardener, my grandfather found the $100 and gave it to the gardener. And he was so excited that next day that the gardener is going to show up and fix this garden, and he had a lot of issues with trees that needed to be taken out that he physically could not do. So he woke up early at 6 a.m. waiting for the gardener. It was 6 a.m., 7, 8, 9, 2 p.m., 4 p.m., 6 p.m., and he did not show up. So then he waited to the next day, and then the third day, and fourth day, and a whole week. The gardener took the money and ran away. And it was so painful to observe my grandfather because he really thought that they built trust by eating bread and salt together. And that was like a little ritual that they did together. And he trusted that person based on that ritual, but that gardener took advantage of the situation. The reason I'm sharing this with you is beyond the experience of my grandfather. It is my experience too, as a 5-year-old, sitting there watching the experience. That hurt me as well, and that taught me early on not to trust. And that taught me that other people could hurt and to have contracts. So if anyone wants to be my friend, you have to sign a contract. So everything, and so it's beyond just the action itself. It has a ripple effect of how we are engaging with others and how we start perceiving trust. So that's why you don't see many people just eating salt and bread and having big deals, big contracts. Now everybody wants like official things. So imagine how much we're complicating our lives because of this. The next one is competence. And this is so important. As I mentioned to you, you can be the most ethical, honest, loyal person, but if you don't know what you're doing, oh my goodness, like we cannot trust you. So if you work with a doctor and the doctor doesn't know what she's doing or he's doing, it's gonna be a problem. Or if you're getting on a flight and the pilot is not qualified to fly the plane, it's a problem. So I share these, they're funny examples, but for you, what additional skills you need to develop in order to be more competent in what you do. Maybe it is new certificates you need to take. Maybe it is more education you need. Maybe it's books you would want to read once in a while. But competence is so important as part of building trust. Now, next one, and that is like your skill, your knowledge. And what I forgot to mention, it's beyond just the knowledge, it's also how we communicate the knowledge. I realize that many women all around the world, including myself, we challenge. It's difficult for us to share our expertise. It is so hard, and many times we're worried that people are going to see or think that we are bragging. How many of you worry about that? Yeah, like we're always worried that others are going to perceive that we're bragging, so we may as well just stay quiet and not share our experience. I have a funny example about this. In the Middle East, we believe that if you brag about yourself or talk about yourself, that something bad is going to happen, and everything you're bragging about is going to be taken away from you. So when I started my business and I wanted to share my expertise on social media, my mom freaked out and she called me. She's like, Dima, take it all down. She didn't want me to post about my business. She's like, this is not good, take it all down. I was building my brand. I was building more, sharing my expertise so my clients would trust me and would hire me. But it is hilarious how there's cultural element, but also it could be our own internal limitations that we're always worried that if we talk about our expertise, talk about our skills, that it's going to be negatively perceived. And it's not about a matter of that. It is how can we help others with our expertise. Maybe you're really good, you're competent in a specific topic. How about you start helping your team? Maybe there's a lunch and learn, volunteer to speak. Maybe you share articles, you talk about that topic. So this way you're positioning yourself as a subject matter expert and continuing to show your competence. Consistency. And it is not just a one-time thing, it is your behavior needs to be so consistent. And some of you may be looking at this and you're like, she's talking about consistency and showing us an image of a hurricane. Yeah, so when I live in Louisiana, and when I first moved to Louisiana, I was surprised, but not shocked, that we were having a hurricane. I was horrified to go through the first hurricane ever. But what I learned from that experience is I watched how my community members, they stayed together, supported each other. It was just so powerful to see that it's not a matter about the individuals, that I started trusting and loving that community more than ever because I saw how much they were helping even people that are total strangers, and they would go to their home and help them with the situation when the homes get flooded. A couple of years later, we experienced the same. Then we had a bad hurricane coming, and I remember my brother and family members and friends, everybody calling me, and they're like, what's wrong with you? Leave Louisiana. But in my situation, I did not want to leave. I wanted to be with my community because I knew at that time, if anything bad happens, that my community, they're going to help me. I trust them. I wanted to be there and support them. So it's interesting when you see these things, it is by our action and when it is consistent. Now we had Ida last year, and I observed many of my communities running away. So I'm like, I can't stay here, so I ran away too. I went to Houston, I'm like, I can't stay. So, but it is, what do we need to do to continue to be consistent in our behavior and how we are working with others? And I realized that some days we may have a bad day, we may be in a bad mood. It's normal, we're human, but overall, are you consistent? Are you being honest? Are you being ethical? Are you continuing to grow your knowledge? So these are the 5, and of course there's so much more, but transparency, caring, integrity, competence, consistency, all of these are so important. And I want to mention something about transparency. It's not just a matter of being honest, it is being open to sharing information with others. And I realize this is happening more and more now, where people are more comfortable to share knowledge. I remember when I was early in my career, everybody wanted to hide information. How many of you remember that, where we just hide information? I'm not going to share my information with you because if I share them, you may have an advantage over me. And yeah, so much not sharing. But now there's so much more transparency where people want to share, they want to help, and they realize in order to grow, we need to all grow together. So now let's talk about the psychology of trust, because there's so much stuff that happens in the background, and it's fascinating to learn about it and to utilize that information as we are building trust with others. So trust is something that people tend to judge in others within 100 milliseconds. I used to think it's with the first impression. This is first impression. Whenever we meet someone for the first time, I used to think that it took like 7 seconds. But apparently it's not. It is so much quicker than that. When we meet somebody, our brain is automatically trying to protect us. And the brain is telling us, is this person safe or not, which means we need to run away? Does this person know what she or he or them are talking about, or they're not? So we're automatically processing this information unconsciously without even realizing we're doing that. Even when you met me for the first time, you saw me on the stage, most likely you were questioning, can I trust her? Does she know what she's talking about? And that is very, very normal. And that takes us to, and that it makes us human, which is important. That, before I go to the next one, that takes us to conversation about unconscious bias. How many of you've taken a course about unconscious bias? That is wonderful. I'm so glad. Over the years, I'm seeing more and more people taking these, and it's wonderful. Unconscious bias are the biases that we have that are stored in our mind based on our experiences, our caregivers, what they told us about others. It is based on what the media keep feeding us about other people and who we can trust, who we cannot trust. And there's so much that go into building trust related to unconscious bias. There are over 180 biases that we all have, and they affect how we work with others, who we bring to our trust circle, who do we push away, and all of this without even realizing. One of the 180 I'm going to share with you today is affinity bias. And affinity bias is we tend to trust people that are similar to us. We tend to like to be their friends. We like to hire them, promote them, mentor them without even realizing it. It's easy to relate to others. So let's do a little activity. Get a piece of paper and a pen. And so go ahead. And I want you, once you get it, I want you to write down names of 5 people that you trust the most that are not family members. 5 people you trust the most that are not family members. One time I asked this, and one of the attendees said, I only have 3, my attorney, my doctor, and my CPA. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we have trust issues. So names of 5 people you trust the most. If you don't have 5, less is okay. That gave me from your facial expression. Okay. I'll give you a few more seconds. So put a check mark next to anyone who has same ethnicity as yours. Now put a check mark next to anyone who, you're funny, you're starting to laugh already. Put a check mark next to anyone who has similar age group as yours. So they, like within 10 years age group. Put a check mark next to anyone who has similar political views. This one is a big one. Then a check mark next to anyone who has similar religious beliefs. A check mark next to anyone who has similar socioeconomic status. And did I say they can't be family members? Okay, because that would be tricky. Then you have to do it all over again. And then one final one, check mark next to anyone who has similar educational level. So what did you realize? Can you say that louder? Can you say it louder? Yours is all the same. Congratulations. How many of you have so many check marks? Congratulations, you have affinity bias. So, so again, to remind you, affinity bias is we tend to trust people that are similar to us. And this little exercise shows you the people that are closest to you, how they're similar to you. So imagine how many people we may be pushing away without even realizing because of our biases, and we're not really trusting them, we're not bringing them to our trust circle because of this. And also think about how much this affects the work environment, who we like to work with, who we would like to go to have lunch with, who we want to work on a project with. It affects everything. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these biases. All of us, I'm assuming, are good people, but we still have biases. And when I worked on this, I had so many check marks as well. I consider myself an inclusive person. I love everybody. I want to bring people into my life and learn from their journeys, but still I have affinity bias. So that's something when we think about what are some of the elements that stand in our way without even realizing it, one of them is the affinity bias. Now, another concept which I love, it is the oxytocin. So oxytocin is a hormone that our body generates whenever we love. It's the love hormone. It is, we get it when we are in love. We get this hormone if we're petting a dog or a cat, or if a snake, you like a pet snake, or a turtle, or you're not petting a fish, I hope. So it is the one, we get this hormone when we hold a baby. So it's a love hormone. It makes us feel more connected. So we need to think about this, and a lot of researchers went deep into it and realized that when we trust somebody, we tend to have more oxytocin. And also, when they gave animals or humans more oxytocin, these people tend to become more trusting of others as well. So now when we think about, we want more oxytocin, we want to create more trusting relationships, and think about in the work environment, I'm hoping you're not bringing your cat, dog, or your pet snake to work, or maybe some of you are, and that's fine. But how can we utilize this oxytocin in order to build more trust? And the researchers found is when we feel connected to somebody, we tend to have, our body creates more oxytocin. So how do we get connected? When we're listening to them. I remember one of the people there mentioned, person that they trust listens. When we're present with them, when we are truly hearing what they say, when we care, also when we help others, they get oxytocin, we get oxytocin, and that is so powerful. It creates a more stronger bond for trust. So that's something for us to think about. We're human. We all want to connect. We all want to relate to others. And this is one way to realize it's not just our behavior, even our body changes, our hormones changes, and it's just so powerful. Okay, yeah, we're having clicker challenges today. So now the body language. How many of you, you tend to sit like this in meetings? You cross your arms, and then you cross, and I'm gonna do it without falling with my high heels, you cross your legs. How many of you sit like that in meetings? I love to sit like this. You do that too? So why do you think we sit like this? You appear you're guarded, but why do we tend to feel comfortable sitting like this? Keeps you warm, yes, so usually conference rooms are very cold. Meeting rooms are cold. It keeps you warm. What else? Protection. You feel more protected when you're sitting like this. It's just comfortable, right? Like it's as simply as that it's just comfortable. And I feel that I can concentrate more when I'm sitting like this and I'm so focused. But then how am I being perceived? One person mentioned earlier, like more protective, being like trying to protect myself. Yeah, you're right. You're being perceived that you're being closed off from the others. Is it going to be easy for other people to trust us when we're just sitting like this? Right? It doesn't help other people to trust us. So that's why we need to think about it. And instead, we need to open up. There's a research that's done by a Harvard professor, and some of you may have watched it. It's a she gave a TED Talk, and her name is I think it's Amy Cuddy, and she talked about the body language. And she realized that the more we open up, the more we tend to become confident. The more we close off, the more we become less confident. And then she compared like women and how we sit in meetings and how before an interview, how we closed off and we're just trying to protect ourselves. And then she compared that to men, how they open up and they're in meetings and they're taking space. And she looked also at different animals and how these animals were expressing themselves and making themselves bigger and making themselves more confident. And as a result, the hormones would change as well. So I'm not saying to go to a meeting and to stand up like this and you say, hello, boss. So I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is before you go, maybe you're giving a presentation, before you're having, you're going to have difficult conversation, go to your office, do the power pause, like open yourself up. If you don't have an office, you have a cubicle, go to the restroom, but open yourself up. And in meetings, we need to be so much more intentional in not being closed off, because this way it's difficult for them to trust us. And what I realized is the more we are confident, the easier it's going to be for other people to trust us. If we're just happy and comfortable with who we are and not being so protective of ourselves, then it's, again, easier to talk to us. So that's going to be the body language, and we're going to go into a little more details. So eye contact is so important. Where I grew up in the small community in the Middle East, we were taught early on, especially women, that we're not supposed to have eye contact. You don't, because that is so insulting, especially if I'm talking to adults or somebody in authority or to a male. I just should not look at them in the eye. And if I do, that means it's offensive. So I came to the US and I was a teller. And imagine I was sitting working as a teller, trying to cash checks and not looking at my clients and looking everywhere, but looking at their eyes. So it was interesting now when I think about it, how it was in the past. It could be cultural, where some people are just not comfortable to have an eye contact. And I'm not saying look at them like this. Like, don't freak people out. But it's important as we are communicating to truly look at people in the eye. And that shows that we're listening and we're confirming that what we are hearing. The other one is the open posture. And this is the example that I shared with you earlier. Like, open yourself. Anytime you see yourself closed and trying to stay warm, just challenge yourself and open yourself, because you don't realize how this is going to help you feel more confident and how that's going to help other people to feel more comfortable talking with you and as a result trust you more. The other one is smile genuinely, and this is another cultural one. As I was growing up, I was taught, especially when I leave our home, I'm not supposed to smile. So it would have been weird coming to the US and seeing people walking their dogs and saying, good morning, and being so happy, like, oh my goodness. I was taught early on, the programming in my mind is if people do that, they're just weird, and you don't want to be weird. And then, of course, I was a teller, not looking at my clients and not smiling, but processing their transaction. Can you imagine how horrible teller I was? So my poor manager, she kept putting sticky notes everywhere with happy faces. She would go at the end of the line and try to act like a clown to make me smile. Eventually, I smiled so much, so the clients started asking what happy pills I was getting. But many times I'm sharing this because it truly can be cultural. As you're interacting with others and you don't see them giving the eye contact or not smiling the way we're comfortable with, just ask yourself if it is a cultural thing as well. But also, I'm sharing these examples to help you realize that we can change. So we can learn about what is important to build trust and project ourselves in a positive way. And let's continue to adapt to it and continue to learn from it. Then the hands, and the hands is interesting because, like, how many of you see some people like standing like this and talking? Can you trust someone like this? Does it make you feel that they're hiding something? Yeah. How many times you see, especially women, we sit and we hold our hands under the table? It's the same thing. It's hard for people to trust us if they don't see our hands. It is unconscious. Like it doesn't mean we're holding anything in our hand, but it is unconsciously, science shows that we need to be able to see other people's hands. So when you're sitting in a meeting, just be intentional in putting your hands on the table. Don't hide the hands and don't do this. But also, one of the things I'm always surprised about, how people assume that they should not use their hand gestures as they're talking. And I disagree with that. I think the hand gestures bring people in, make them feel more welcomed as you're talking with them. I'm not saying do this. That is not the goal here. But like as I'm talking to you, do you feel is so much more comfortable as I am using my hands? So use your hands. It's good. I don't know who's teaching this and telling people don't use your hands. Like if I stand like this and talk to you like this, are you going to be comfortable? I should just go to Britain and be a soldier. But these are things that we need to think about. They're minor little details. And if we can tweak them, and a lot of them are easy to tweak, it's just going to make building trust, building relationships, and having better communication so much better. And then be a mirror. And I learned that from sales classes I took in the past. It's interesting. I'll tell you what they do, and then I'll tell you the psychology behind it. So what they taught was that if you're meeting with a client, and the client sits like this, you sit like this. If the client sits like this, you sit like this. If the client is doing certain things with their body language, you mirror that and you do it. So initially, I was surprised about the whole thing until I started linking it to affinity bias. Affinity bias, we like people that are similar to us. So what they were teaching us was so tricky. Unconsciously, if we mirror the body language of other people, without them realizing, they get to tend to feel more comfortable with us, and as a result, trust us or feel that we're listening to them. So start, if you work with anyone who's in sales, or if you have family members that are in sales, start watching them and see what they are doing. Did you observe that? You started thinking about that. Yeah, so it's a lot of little things that psychology is involved, things that we're not aware of, but it's fascinating to learn about these things and use them in a positive way in order to continue to build healthy relationships and better trust. Oops, you saw so many slides that I didn't want to show you yet. Trust in yourself. Because it's going to be so difficult for us to trust others, and it's difficult for others to trust us if we don't trust ourselves. And my work with women from all around the world, I keep hearing similar messages related to how they feel that they have low self-confidence, how they feel that they have low self-worth, which at the end of the day, it is low trust in themselves. How many of you feel that? Yeah, and I know I feel that as well. It is the fear of making mistakes, always worried of being judged by others, and the aspiration of being perfect. All of us as if we want to achieve being perfect, but there is no perfection. And as a result, we end up feeling bad about ourselves, and we end up not trusting ourselves. So that is something for us to think about is why are we not trusting ourselves, and what can we do about it? One of the things that we can do about it is to establish and keep commitments that we make to ourselves. So think about the beginning of the year when we have New Year resolution, and it's just so exciting. We get all of these goals, and then what happens by March? Oops. Life gets in the way. So maybe we go back to these resolutions and we pick just one, because it's easy to pick 700. So we pick just one and we break it into small little pieces, and we start working on these little pieces, knowing that we're gonna face fears, where we may fail, it may not go our way, but when there's small little goals, it just helps us to start building more trust in ourselves. When we achieve those goals, that's gonna make us feel good, but if we don't, it's a small little goal, so it's not gonna be the end of the world. And that's where trust is also linked to self-compassion. So in order to trust ourselves, we need to be compassionate with ourselves and realize that we're not gonna be perfect. And anyone we know that tries to act like they're perfect, just know that it's just a mask. And there's just all kinds of mess in the background, because we're human. None of us are perfect. So some of the main takeaways, and some of them we already covered, but I wanted to put them all on one page for you. The first one is project trust in everything you do. And that is so important. This is everything we talked about: to be consistent, to care about others, to be honest, to be ethical, to do all of these things, and not to be like the gardener. So do everything opposite of what the gardener did. Own your mistakes. And this is so powerful, because I see a lot of people, they make a mistake and it's easy for them to automatically start blaming others for these mistakes. Instead, we need to own our mistakes, and instead of all of this, like, own the mistakes and also use them in order to build deeper trust. Because when other people see that we're vulnerable, we're asking for help, we're recognizing that we made a mistake and we're trying to fix it, it's just so much more powerful than to say, it's your fault. I'm sure it's your fault. So that's when it's not going to be good. So in my situation, at one of my jobs, I was managing a global team for IBM, and my manager asked me to consolidate the performance review of everybody in our department for the last 3 years. Not just for my team, but for my peers and for their team members too. So like, so much information. And it's very confidential, because it's like everybody's performance reviews globally for 3 years. And it's interesting thinking about it, not related to trust, but my manager selected me to put all of this, consolidate the data. I was the only female manager. So it's funny how we get these jobs, but a whole different conversation. It's an issue, but different topic. So I worked on this document, made it so great, beautiful, bright colors, and I attached it to the email, and the second I clicked on send, you know that like millisecond you send it and you're like, oops, I sent it to the wrong people, and you just want to close the laptop as fast as possible, so hopefully it's not going to go out. I closed it, it did go out. So what I realized, that instead of emailing it to my peers and to my manager, I emailed it to my team, to everybody that report to me, and it was such a horrible mistake. I think it's like one of the worst mistakes I've ever done. And I felt horrified. So I immediately contacted my manager, I contacted HR, and I said, I messed up, I need help right now. And they immediately started helping me with it, and they went and they blocked the email before, I think nobody saw it, but before anyone saw it. And that was so powerful, because I was vulnerable, I asked for help, and helped them realize that I made a mistake, instead of blaming others or blaming a situation or complaining that I should not be doing this task. So think about your work and how, whenever you're making a mistake, own it, learn from it, realize that it's not just you, we all make mistakes. It's not fun, but we all make mistakes, and use that to build even deeper and stronger relationships with the people that you're working with. Next one, avoid making commitments that you cannot keep. So let me ask you here, how many of you You don't like to say no when someone is asking you for a favor, to work on something. How many of you here, you have issues with setting limits? Me too. Isn't that interesting? So we, regardless of the culture we're raised in, we are all taught to continue to help and serve and nurture. And that's part of our feminine qualities. And it's not feminine doesn't mean just women. Men they have feminine qualities too. And it's as a result, we're raised to believe that we should not say no and we should not set limits. And I know in my situation, it was very, very difficult because I was always worried if I do these things, if I say no, if I set limits, that's gonna stop me from advancing. And that means it's gonna be something bad. So let me share with you a story. I worked for a vice president at IBM. He was so high up in the organization. He had over 10,000 people that reported to him. His name is Bob. I loved Bob. He's a good man. But Bob was a visionary. Bob had a lot of ideas. One day he's thinking about this idea, and then the next day thinking about this idea. And I was supporting him directly, and he's like, Dima, I want you to work on this. And then next day, I want you to work on this. And then third day, I want you to work on this. And here I am. Yeah, sure, I can do that. Yeah, sure, I can do that. And the list kept getting bigger and bigger, and it was so overwhelming that I was working nights and weekends, and I still could not figure out how I was accomplishing this. And my problem was that I did not know which ones he really wanted me to work on and which one he forgot about. How many of you know someone like Bob? Absolutely, there's so many of them. And the challenge is if we don't manage upward, we're not going to be able to deliver high quality work. And as a result, nobody's going to trust us. And as a result, we're not going to advance. Here's the problem that happened. I overworked myself to a point I got sick, physically sick, and ended in the hospital. I was like, my body was like, not doing this anymore. And it was just so painful that even after that, I was on short-term disability for a month and a half. My body was just so exhausted. And I remember around that time, I was struggling because I knew I did not want to go back to the old way. But at the same time, I did not know what to do about it. Like I thought I could not say no to Bob, and I thought I could not set limits. So I was talking with my mentor, and I'm struggling with this, and she gave me the best tip ever. And I'll share it with you, and if you want it, the document, email me. I'll put my email, and I'll email it to you. It is, she said, just create an Excel document. It's a simple one, and in every row, you just type the name of the project you're working on. And then so one column has the rows with the projects. The next column is the date you started working on these projects. The next column is the ones that when you expect the project to be completed for each one. The next column is the status. Is it completed? Is it still in progress? Is it delayed? So you have the status. And you can put the color green or yellow and red. And then the next one is any dependency, if you're depending on project to be approved or on other team members to complete something. And she told me something so powerful. She said, in order for you to be able to manage your workload, you need to manage upward. In order for me to be able to do quality work and not to overburn myself, I needed to learn how to manage Bob. And the way to manage him is I have the list of everything I'm working on, which was so many projects, maybe 1,200 projects, just to exaggerate a little. Now you cannot trust me anymore, I exaggerate. So when Bob would come to me and would ask me to work on a new project with so much excitement and enthusiasm, I would say, sure, I can do that, but here's everything I'm working on. Which ones would you like me to put on hold? Which ones would you like to delegate to somebody else? And that was so powerful, and what was surprising for me, he was open to it. He was okay with it. The issue wasn't truly Bob. Bob is Bob. He's always going to have all of these ideas. The issue that it was me, I was so uncomfortable saying no, setting limits, and managing my boss. And when I learned how to do that, and I was honest, and I was organized, and I was clear in my communication, he started following my process. So when I became a manager, I ensured every team member that reported to me would complete this Excel document every day, like every time before we meet for one-on-one, which was every other week. They have to complete it, they have to send it to me. And it was important for me to understand their workload and also understand what if I can give them additional projects or not. So think about this. How many of you feel that a system like this would help you in being more confident in saying no or setting limits? Yeah, so you can create it your own. If you want my Excel document, just email me and you'll get my email shortly. So sometimes when we do simple things like this, we're able to manage our workload. We are hopefully able to have better quality work, and that is going to show competence, and that's going, as a result, to continue to build trust. And people, they're gonna say, if they're giving me a project, they know it's gonna be completed, instead of like totally swimming in a swamp of projects like I was before. Now the next one, do what's right over what's easy. So don't think about the short term, think about the long term. As you're working with others, sometimes it's easy to think about what's going on in the short term. Like with the gardener, it was easy for him to take the $100 and run away, but he forgot about the long term. The long term, if he worked and he did a good job, maybe my grandfather would have hired him for more work. Maybe he would have had referrals for additional people that need help with, and he missed out on that. So think about your work and your interactions with others, and how can you continue to build long-term relationships that you continue to sustain and you continue to nurture. Building trust with others must start with building trust with yourself. And this is what we were talking about earlier. It has to start with ourselves. It has to start by us being kind to ourselves, realizing that we all make mistakes, realizing that we should not be perfect, and that's okay, and continuing to really understand what are our goals and how can we achieve them, because when we achieve our goals, that's going to give us a boost of confidence as well. And then focus on the similarities with others. It's easy to look at others and feel that we're different, and I struggled with that a lot when I first moved to the US. So I would be interacting with everyone similar to you, and I'm like, but they're just so different than me. They're not gonna understand me. And then the more I learned about other people, their journey, their experiences, their hobbies, their fears, their insecurities, I realized, wow, we have so much in common that we did not realize. And the reason we focus on the things in common, it is very much aligned to the affinity bias, right? We want to build affinity. We want people to feel comfortable and that they can trust us and that we can trust them as well. And then be intentional in building trust in every interaction. So intentional is a very powerful word. It's not just, you know, I'm a good person. I'm going to go through life being a good person. That's good, but that's not enough. We need to be intentional in our interactions with our team, in focusing, in communicating with them, learning about them, and in every interaction, being curious about them, but also being so committed about building trust. So back to my grandfather and the gardener, I wanted to finish the presentation with this. And I want you, every time you see a loaf of bread or a piece of bread or whatever you're doing, eating bread, I want you to think about what can you do to continue to build trust. And I want you to think about how much trust is fragile, because we don't want to be like the gardener. We want to be like people that are nurturing relationships. And a best way to do it, knowing that I know I love bread and I love salt and butter too. Butter was not part of the conversation. I'm going to bring it here. It is every time you're seeing bread, think about what additional things you need to do in order to continue to build trust with others. So this is my contact information. I'm going to check the time to see how much time we have for questions. But even if I don't cover all your questions now, you're welcome to email me, and I'm happy to share it. And again, if you want the Excel document, document. I have blog about building trust. I have other things, resources that would help you. Just email me. So now let's look at the time. Oh my goodness, we have 1 minute. 1 minute. Let's see how many questions we can get in 1 minute. But I'm gonna be here as well. So if you want to come and talk with me, I'm happy to help. It was a pleasure spending time with you. I hope you got some good information and keep building trust. Maybe keep eating bread too. Yeah, thank you.